Hello Midnights. Thank you for tuning in. Next up, The Entity, When Fear Manifests and Audience is Real. Let us know where you are listening from and don't forget to subscribe. In 1982, director Sidney J. Furie unleashed The Entity upon an unsuspecting public, a film that dared to delve into the chilling true story of a woman who claimed to be repeatedly sexually assaulted by an unseen, supernatural force. More than just a horror film, The Entity became a phenomenon for its unflinching portrayal of terror and its profound impact on cinemagoers, leaving them shaken, disturbed, and questioning the boundaries of reality. The movie introduces us to Carla Moran, played with raw vulnerability and startling conviction by Barbara Hershey. Hershey's commitment to the role was absolute. She immersed herself in research, reportedly consulting with the actual Doris Bither and parapsychologists, and endured physically demanding shoots to convey the brutal reality of Carla's ordeal. A resilient single mother living in Los Angeles with her 3 children, Carla's life is brutally disrupted when she begins to experience terrifying and violent attacks from an invisible entity. These are no mere bumps in the night, they are brutal, physical assaults that leave her bruised, battered, and utterly traumatized, frequently culminating in horrifying sexual violations. As the attacks escalate in frequency and intensity, Carla desperately seeks help from friends, family, and eventually, a skeptical psychiatrist, Dr. Snyderman, before connecting with parapsychologists. The film meticulously documents her harrowing descent into fear, frustration, and isolation as her increasingly desperate claims are met with doubt and traditional science struggles to comprehend the malevolent force tormenting her. What truly set The Entity apart from its horror contemporaries was its relentless psychological realism coupled with groundbreaking special effects for its time. Director Sidney J. Furie's approach was to create a pervasive atmosphere of dread rather than relying on cheap jump scares. Furie deliberately chose to not show the entity visually for much of the film, forcing the audience's imagination to do the terrifying work. The unseen assailant's terrifying presence was masterfully conveyed through subtle, unnerving cues, shifting objects, an unnatural chill in the air, the creaking of floorboards, items being violently thrown, or the sheer, unadulterated terror etched onto Barbara Hershey's face. These moments would build tension to an unbearable degree before erupting into truly disturbing and graphically depicted attacks. The special effects, pioneered by William Cruise and his team, were remarkably innovative for their budget and era, utilizing complex wire work, pneumatic rams, reverse photography, and ingenious camera trickery to achieve the illusion of an invisible force physically interacting with Carla, throwing her across rooms, tearing off her clothes, and even sexually assaulting her. This meticulous craft made the invisible assailant's physical manifestations shockingly real, forcing the audience to confront the horrifying reality of Carla's situation, which in turn led to a visceral, deeply unsettling, and often profoundly disturbing viewing experience. To fully appreciate the impact of The Entity, it's helpful to understand the cultural and cinematic landscape it emerged from. In the early 1980s, while the late 1970s saw a boom in supernatural horror, like The Exorcist and The Omen, the early 1980s were increasingly dominated by the rise of the slasher film. Franchises like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street became immensely popular, focusing on tangible, masked killers and graphic practical effects. The Entity, with its invisible, supernatural assailant and deeply psychological torment, stood in stark contrast to this trend, offering a different, more insidious kind of fear as it rejected the jump-scare-heavy approach for a sustained sense of dread and violation. This period also saw a fertile ground for public interest in the paranormal and true stories. Books like The Amityville Horror, 1977, and numerous investigations by figures like Ed and Lorraine Warren captured widespread attention. Films claiming to be based on a true story held a particular allure, blurring the lines between fiction and reality and making the horror feel more immediate and terrifying, a phenomenon The Entity expertly capitalized on by presenting its claims with a chilling pseudo-documentary style. Furthermore, a crucial subtext of The Entity is Carla's struggle to be believed, which connects to the historical perception of female hysteria and medical skepticism. Historically, women's reports of inexplicable physical or psychological suffering were often dismissed as hysteria or mental illness by the medical establishment, sometimes even attributed to sexual repression or overactive imaginations. Carla's frustration with Dr. Snyderman and his persistent attempts to rationalize her trauma as a psychological manifestation of past abuse or repressed desires resonated deeply with audiences familiar with this historical bias, allowing the film to tap into the very real fear of being disbelieved and invalidated, particularly when experiencing something outside the realm of conventional understanding. Lastly, understanding poltergeist phenomena versus traditional hauntings adds depth. While often conflated, Poltergeists, German for noisy ghost, are typically characterized by physical disturbances, objects moving, strange noises, physical assaults, and are often theorized to be connected to a living person, acting as a focal point for powerful psychokinetic energy, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis or RSBK. The Doris Bither case, with its physical manifestations, aligns more closely with poltergeist activity, and some investigators, including Dr. Taff, explore the RSPK theory, adding a layer of psychological complexity to the entity beyond a simple disembodied spirit. Beyond its capacity to terrify, the entity offers fertile ground for exploring deeper philosophical, ethical, and ideological questions. At its core, the film forces a confrontation with the limits of empirical understanding. If something cannot be seen, touched, or scientifically measured, does it exist? Carla's experience challenges the very foundation of what we define as real, pushing viewers to consider whether reality is solely what is physically verifiable, or if there are phenomena that transcend our current scientific tools and understanding, thus delving into philosophical debates around metaphysics and epistemology, the theory of knowledge. A central ethical dilemma presented by the film is the responsibility of society, particularly medical and scientific institutions, when confronted with claims that defy conventional explanation. Dr. Schneiderman's initial dismissal of Carla's story as psychological pathology, while perhaps medically rational, becomes ethically problematic as her suffering escalates. The film implicitly critiques the arrogance of rigid empiricism and the potential harm caused by a refusal to consider phenomena outside established paradigms, prompting us to consider the ethical obligation to believe, or at least investigate with an open mind, those who report trauma, regardless of its source. Moreover, the film powerfully illustrates a deeply ingrained patriarchal ideology. Carla, a woman reporting horrific sexual assaults, faces an uphill battle to be validated. Her trauma is almost immediately pathologized as a psychological issue stemming from her personal history or repressed desires. This mirrors historical and ongoing societal tendencies to disbelieve or blame female victims, attributing their suffering to female hysteria or psychological instability rather than external aggressors. The invisible nature of the assailant further amplifies this, making it easy for others to dismiss her claims as delusion, echoing the real-world difficulties many women face in having their experiences of violence taken seriously. The entity is also a chilling exploration of victimhood, agency, and control. Carla is stripped of control over her body, her home, and her sanity. The invisible nature of the assailant makes it impossible for her to fight back conventionally, highlighting the profound helplessness of being a victim of sexual violence. Her desperate struggle to understand, contain, and ultimately reclaim control of her life becomes a central ethical and psychological narrative, asking what happens to a person when their most fundamental right, bodily autonomy, is violated by an unseen force, and no one believes them. Finally, the film's controversial based on a true story claim raises significant ethical questions regarding the adaptation of real-life drama for entertainment. By taking creative liberties with Doris Bither's experiences and sensationalizing the sexual assault aspects, the film walks a fine line between empathetic portrayal and exploitation, forcing a discussion about the responsibilities filmmakers have when depicting real individuals' suffering, and the potential impact on those individuals and the broader understanding of such sensitive topics. To better understand the entity's unique place in horror and its thematic weight, it's useful to draw comparisons and contrasts with other works and concepts. Compared to the Amityville Horror, 1979, both films are based on sensationalized true haunting stories from the 1970s and feature families tormented in their homes. However, the Amityville Horror focuses on a more traditional demonic possession of a house and its male lead, with supernatural events affecting the family more broadly, whereas the entity narrows its focus to the deeply personal and sexually violent assault of one individual, making it far more psychologically invasive and disturbing. While Amityville relies on jump scares and overt manifestations, the entity's horror is often more subtle and insidious until its brutal climaxes. Contrasting with slasher films, the entity explicitly differentiates itself. Slasher films feature a tangible, often masked, human killer that can be fought or fled from, and their violence, while graphic, is typically less about psychological violation and more about body count. The entity is invisible, unstoppable by conventional means, and its attacks are deeply personal and humiliating, making the terror fundamentally different from being chased by a man with a knife. A comparison to The Exorcist, 1973, reveals that both films depict horrific, relentless attacks on a female protagonist that defy scientific explanation, ultimately leading to a confrontation with the supernatural. However, The Exorcist clearly identifies its antagonist as a demon that possesses a body, allowing for a Catholic ritual to combat it, while the entity's antagonist remains largely undefined and unidentifiable, existing outside clear religious or scientific frameworks, which contributes to its unique and terrifying ambiguity. Carla's suffering is also far more isolating, as she lacks the clear moral and religious support system found in The Exorcist. Furthermore, there's a stark contrast in the depiction of the supernatural itself. Many horror films personify their supernatural threats with a clear visual form: ghosts, vampires, zombies, demons, but the entity's decision to keep its primary assailant invisible for most of the film, revealing only its destructive impact and the victim's terror, forces the audience to rely on imagination and empathy, making the horror more internal and pervasive. This approach also reinforces the theme of disbelieved trauma, as there's nothing there for others to see. Finally, the film draws powerful parallels with broader narratives of disbelieved trauma. Beyond the supernatural, the entity functions as a potent metaphor for the experience of being a victim of sexual assault or other forms of trauma that are disbelieved or rationalized away by society. Carla's desperate cries for help being met with skepticism and attempts to find a psychological reason for her experiences resonate powerfully with real-world scenarios, making the film's horror deeply unsettling on a human level, even for those who reject its supernatural premise. One of the most compelling and controversial aspects of The Entity is its claim to be based on a true story, with the film's protagonist, Carla Moran, inspired by the real-life experiences of Doris Bither, a woman living in Culver City, California, in the mid-1970s. Bither claimed that she and her 4 children were subjected to a barrage of extreme paranormal activity, including objects being thrown, strange lights, disembodied voices, and most disturbingly, repeated physical and sexual assaults by unseen entities. Some of Bither's more sensational claims, though not fully elaborated in the film, included the appearance of a monstrous, green-eyed man figure that materialized in her bedroom, a grotesque being that seemed to be comprised of human flesh and blood, and other physical manifestations that terrified her children. Doris Bither, desperate for answers, sought help from parapsychologists Dr. Barry Taff and Dr. Carrie Gaynor from UCLA's then-active parapsychology lab, who conducted an investigation at her home, reportedly witnessing some inexplicable phenomena and taking photographs that showed strange energy patterns. Frank DeFelitta, the author of the 1978 novel The Entity upon which the film is based, interviewed Bither and the investigators extensively. His novel and subsequent screenplay, however, took significant creative liberties, dramatically intensifying the sexual assault aspects and adding elaborate fictional elements not directly corroborated by the real-life investigation. A direct comparison highlights the deliberate choices made by the filmmakers to heighten the horror, streamline the narrative, and appeal to a broader audience while acknowledging its real-world inspiration. For instance, while the film's Carla Moran is presented as a strong, resilient single mother of 3, a relatively stable figure forced into an extraordinary nightmare, the real Doris Bither was a single mother of 4, reportedly living in a deeply disrepair-condemned home with a more troubled personal history, including struggles with alcoholism and a documented history of childhood abuse. The film largely minimizes these more complex, potentially distracting details to focus purely on Carla's victimhood and the inexplicable nature of the terror she faces, making her a more universally sympathetic figure. Furthermore, the movie largely focuses on one primary, malevolent, unseen entity that almost exclusively targets Carla with repeated, explicit sexual assaults, whereas Doris Bither claimed to be attacked by 3 distinct entities, 2 smaller, 1 larger, and while sexual assaults were a key and horrifying claim, her experiences also encompassed a broader spectrum of poltergeist activity. The film simplifies this for a more focused and impactful antagonist. Regarding the investigative approach and portrayal of science, in the film, Carla first endures sessions with a skeptical psychiatrist who dismisses her claims as psychological delusion, before connecting with eager parapsychologists who are portrayed as almost sensationalists, culminating in their dramatic, fictional capture experiment. In reality, Dr. Taff and Dr. Gaynor from UCLA conducted a more measured, scientific investigation, documenting phenomena and attempting to understand them within a parapsychological framework. They did not attempt to trap the entity as depicted in the film, and Taff himself later expressed nuanced skepticism about the spectral rape allegations, suggesting they might have been a manifestation of Bither's own powerful, uncontrolled psychic energy, a recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis or RSBK event, rather than external, malevolent spirits. The movie simplifies this complex dynamic into a more straightforward conflict between scientific skepticism and paranormal truth. As for the children's experience and family dynamics, while Carla's children in the movie are aware of the disturbances and witness some of the attack's aftermath, Their direct involvement and the full impact on them are somewhat muted compared to Carla's ordeal, whereas in contrast, the real Doris Bither's 4 children were reportedly very much aware of the entities, even coining nicknames for them, and some accounts suggest they were also physically affected by the phenomena, making the family's ordeal even more collective and pervasive. Finally, the film concludes with a climactic, unsuccessful attempt to trap the entity in a sealed cold room, after which Carla moves to Texas, with an unsettling epilogue stating the attacks lessened but never fully stopped. The real Doris Bither did move from Culver City, and while the phenomena reportedly subsided significantly after her relocation, accounts vary on whether it ever completely ceased, and the dramatic, failed capture attempt in the film is a pure cinematic invention designed to provide a thrilling, yet ultimately unresolved, climax. The reaction of cinema visitors to the entity was nothing short of profound, and often polarized. The film garnered an almost immediate reputation for being genuinely frightening, not just in a popcorn-spilling way, but in a manner that lingered long after the credits rolled. Many viewers reported feeling deeply disturbed by the film's premise, particularly the sexual nature of the assaults, which pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable for mainstream horror at the time. Some found the scenes so intensely upsetting that they had to look away, or even leave the cinema altogether, overwhelmed by the visceral terror and the feeling of helplessness. The sheer vulnerability of Carla's situation, coupled with the film's relentless pacing and unsettling sound design, which masterfully utilized creaks, groans, and unsettling silences, left many an audience member feeling a palpable sense of unease and violation. Critically, the entity received a distinctly mixed reception upon its initial release. While Barbara Hershey's committed, brave, and utterly convincing performance was almost universally praised, she even won Best Actress at the Avariaz Fantastic Film Festival for her portrayal. Critics were sharply divided on the film's overall effectiveness and, more significantly, its controversial themes. Some critics found the sexual violence exploitative and sensationalist, questioning the ethical implications of basing such graphic content on alleged real events. Others, however, lauded the film as a powerful, if profoundly uncomfortable, exploration of female victimhood, the psychological toll of trauma, and the societal dismissal of women's experiences. The film's depiction of a woman being disbelieved by medical professionals and even her own son at times, resonated deeply with many audience members, drawing uncomfortable parallels to how real-life victims of abuse or inexplicable phenomena are often met with skepticism, doubt, and invalidation. Despite the initial critical split, the entity found its champions and steadily built a fervent following. Notably, renowned director Martin Scorsese has cited it as one of the scariest films ever made, praising its chilling atmosphere and psychological depth. Its slow-burn psychological horror, combined with moments of intense, visceral terror, distinguishes it from many contemporary slasher films, positioning it closer to the more cerebral, unsettling horror of films like The Exorcist. The film's ambiguous ending, which suggests that the real Carla Moran continued to experience attacks, albeit less frequently, further amplified the unsettling nature of the narrative, leaving audiences with a lingering sense of unease and the chilling possibility that such things could exist beyond our understanding. In the decades since its release, the entity has cemented its place as a cult classic and a significant, if still controversial, film in the horror genre. Its impact on cinema visitors remains a testament to its daring subject matter, Barbara Hershey's unforgettable performance, and the chilling effectiveness of its execution. For those who dared to witness Carla Moran's ordeal, the entity was more than just a movie. It was a deeply disturbing experience that tapped into primal fears of the unknown, the violation of personal space, and left an indelible mark on their minds, forcing them to confront the terrifying possibility of unseen forces and the profound vulnerability of the human psyche.